Hi everyone. I thought we'd get started. So welcome to this week's live stream. I'm in a slightly different location this time around. I moved offices this week, so we've had a few issues with the sound. So I'm hoping the sound is okay. So as usual, if you could give me some feedback how it sounds at your end. Hopefully it sounds all right. But I've got another microphone I can switch to if there are any issues here. So welcome to the live stream. We do this every week. We catch up with what's been going on in markets. Clearly, a lot has been going on. I've got the chart of oil here. So we saw big fall off in the price of oil from, where was it, $65 almost on the 18th of March, and it hit 58.50 the same day. So it's really interesting, I think, what this fall means. And we've seen some falls in the likes of the NASDAQ as well. Stock markets have taken some big falls. Someone's saying the sound is low. Let me push it up a bit at my end. I think that might make it perhaps a little bit better. But also, of course, make sure you've got the volume on YouTube cranked up a bit as well. So what we do in this... do it every week, have a catch up with what's been going on in markets, have a look ahead to where the opportunities might be next week, and we spend most of the time on the trading platform. So we'll be looking at real markets on the platform. Okay, so do the risk warning. This presentation is only for educational purposes. It does not contain, and it should not be construed as containing, investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones and Capital.com accept no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. Spread bets and CFDs are complex instruments and come with a high risk of losing money rapidly due to leverage. 71.2% of retail investor accounts lose money when spread betting and or trading CFDs with this provider. You should consider whether you understand how spread bets and CFDs work and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. So just a recap of how this works. We always do an offer on these things. We're doing zero spread on dollar yen today. So if you've got an account with us, you would have had the email anyway. But if you open an account today, you can trade dollar yen with zero spread. And I think the dollar's an interesting one, clearly, because the dollar's come back again over the last, 24 hours or so. We'll take a look at that. But the format for today, I go through the major markets, stock indices, gold, silver, oil, some foreign exchange pairs, Bitcoin. And then in the questions, if you want to put in any markets that you want looking at, once I've gone through the markets, our usual markets, we'll go back and take a look at those. And that's it. Okay, so let's get into it. Important events for next week, first of all. 22nd of March, early hours of the morning, Chinese interest rates. Interest rates really in focus at the moment, of course, because we have this concern about bond yields. I'll talk a bit about that as we're going through today. So interest rates and inflation, big thing for markets at the moment. 23rd of March, next Tuesday, UK unemployment. Given, of course, the situation with the coronavirus and people on furlough and everything else, I think unemployment numbers always interesting. Wednesday, UK inflation. That's a big one, I think, next Wednesday morning, given markets' concerns about inflation. And Thursday, the 25th of March, US GDP. How well or not is the US economy doing? So that's the major events for next week. Let's talk about markets quickly, then we'll jump onto the trading platform. So we had a volatile week again this week, particularly the last 24 hours or so. We are seeing this thing from a couple of weeks ago, bond yields jumping, spooking investors. We've seen yields jumping up on US bonds, a suggestion that we're going to see a strong recovery in the economy, but also what that means for inflation. And clearly the concern is that central banks aren't too worried about inflation at the moment. If inflation goes out of control, the classic way of trying to keep a lid on inflation is to raise interest rates. Raising interest rates always scares the stock market. But let's take a look. We'll see. We'll have a look at the markets in a minute. Gold and silver, pretty boring again, I think. We'll take a look at them in a minute. Mildly bullish week, crept a little bit higher. Bitcoin, new all-time high since we did the update last Friday. vote. So I don't know where it's trading now. We'll take a look at it. But through 60,000 for Bitcoin, $60,000 at some point in the last week. Crude oil, big faller yesterday, crude. We're going to take a look at it. I think this is an opportunity, but we'll take a look at this. But falling really on a few things. Every week we have oil inventory data come out, how much oil is basically stockpiled. Inventory numbers were higher than expected, so stocks were higher than expected. Concerns about short-term demand with, I'm sure, if you're living in UK or continental Europe, you've seen that big chunks of France have gone back into lockdown again. Italy, there are concerns about what's happening. Is there a third wave going on in continental Europe? How's that going to impact the world economy? Usual stuff. And a rising US dollar also putting a bit of pressure on the oil price. But we'll take a look at all of that. FX, it's been a really volatile week for FX. But when I wrote this morning, ultimately sideways for sterling and the euro against the dollar. But we'll take a look at these as well. We'll take a look at the usual ones as well. That's it. That's our quick wrap up of what's been going on. Let's jump on the platform. I think we're going to start with oil. That's the obvious one to start with. Well, for me it is anyway, because it's such a drastic move. We did have, it had been. Let me show you. Where are the? Where's the stuff? It was our on this trading account. Actually, let me take a step back. For those of you who are new to this, we do regular videos throughout the week on the YouTube channel looking at different markets. And the trades that's been running with the biggest profits had been oil. We've done various trades in oil from the beginning of the year. And I dragged the stop loss up to $63 a barrel on all of those trades on oil. You can see it's currently trading at 60. So we got stopped out yesterday. So here it is yesterday, all the various trades getting stopped out yesterday. So giving back profit from the top, of course, but that's the problem with trend following. We need the market to reverse to get us out of the position. So, but I did have a new trade filled this week on oil. So I ended up buying at 61. I think that was yesterday by the looks of it, 18th of March, underwater at the moment. And I think that must be from the oil video I did earlier this week. Anyway, let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at oil. So concerns about global demand and a stronger US dollar. We have seen, let's just focus on the price for now. Let's not worry about RSIs just yet. We have seen this phenomenal recovery in the last 12 months or last 11 months. So 11 months ago, the price of oil traded down below $11 briefly. The cash price of West Texas crude traded below 11. Famously, of course, the May contract last April went negative. And then we saw this bounce back. We saw the price bounce from 11 up as high as, 44 in the summer. Sell off again into November. And this has been the run. It's been quite the incredible run. So beginning in November, briefly blips below, $34 a barrel. And then during March, a couple of weeks ago, trades up to almost 68. So we saw the price of oil almost rally. And we've had this massive down day yesterday. So the day, what day is it today? Friday. So on Wednesday, the market closed at 64.50. And then this massive day yesterday, I think the biggest fall for oil in some months, the biggest daily fall for oil in some months, traded as high as 64.85, traded as low as 58.28. So basically we saw oil move 10% yesterday. But what's interesting for me, let's bring an RSI in onto this. For me, I often talk about this. I'm a big fan of following trends. If you've watched any of the videos we do on the channel, a big fan of trying to identify and ride the trend. Oil has been a great trend this year. For me, just because it's broken the trend line here, it doesn't necessarily mean the trend is over. Just because trend lines break doesn't mean that that's it. The market's going to start going immediately the other way. We may have a time of consolidation, or perhaps the market goes up, but at a somewhat lower rate than it was going before. So I am tempted to be a buyer down here in oil. I think for now at least, let's see what happens. But I think it could well be an overreaction. But I think it's interesting down here. Let's pick up on some levels on the way up on the price of oil. So we had good support on oil. Short-term support. We'll take a look in the short-term chart in a minute. 19th of Feb down at 58.50. 2nd of March comes down to $59. So 58.50 to 59 has been good support for oil. I think if we start to lurch a bit lower again into next week and take out perhaps the mid-Feb low at 57, we have to be a bit more worried. But for now, if we flip it over to an hourly, I'd be quite tempted to be a buyer down at these levels. So that's the trade I'm going to do. I think what's interesting is what's going on now. We had the low yesterday, 7 o'clock last night. The price trades down to 58.28. Tries to stage a rally into about 9 o'clock this morning, so rallied up to 61.38. So we saw nearly a $3 bounce back for oil. And we've seen it go back and retest. So I'm going to buy it. I'm going to buy oil. So what I'm going to do, I think, I think the most aggressive place for a stop for me, and clearly nothing today is financial advice. We do this just because I think it makes it a lot more interesting if we look at some trades during these sessions. The most aggressive place for a stop for me, the other side of $58, 58.20, yesterday's low. But actually, I'm going to give it a bit more room. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go the other side of the 19th of Feb low, actually even lower than that maybe. I'm going to go here, 12th of Feb low, 57.29. So I'll go, let's say 56.80 for a stop. Okay, it's about $3.50 away from where we are now, but the price moved $6 yesterday. So I need to give the market a bit more room. So 56.80, I said, let's get the trade on. Let's put our stop loss in at 56.80, 56.8. We normally risk 100 quid on these live trades during the live stream thing. So I'm going to buy, there we go, 41 barrels, where it's trading now, with the stop at 56.80. My risk is just under 100 quid. Okay, let's go. Let's buy that. Let's put that trade on. Oh, hang on a second. Do you know what I think I haven't done? There we go. It's done now. I'm in. Right, so let's see how that one works out. So I think it is interesting down at these levels, crude oil, to see if we do, get some sort of support after yesterday's big sell-off. And we're seeing big sell-offs in all sorts of markets at the moment. So let's take a look at some of the others. I think let's take a look at stock market indices. We looked at oil. Let's have a look at. I think the Nasdaq has been the Nasdaq 100 is what we look at. It's been quite a high-profile faller over the last, what is it? It's about a month now, isn't it? So the Nasdaq 100 almost got to 14,000 mid-Feb. At the moment, we're trading at 12,800. So we're off 1,200 points. It's not quite 10%, is it, off those highs? But again, for me, I suppose it depends on where you draw your trend line. I've picked up on this trend line clearly in the past. Off the May lows, that's been a pretty good trend line. Even when we came back and had a little wiggle in early March, the trend line's held. So for me, for now at least, the weakness in these markets is a buying opportunity. So that it's all very dramatic and it makes for great headlines. But for me, for the Nasdaq, as long as we hold above, let's round it up and call it 12,000. I think it's only if it starts to slip below 12,000 does it start to look as if we're going to see a much bigger sell-off. And of course that can happen. It's just not happening at the moment. So we'll see what happens. So the Nasdaq, I think, I'm still positive on the Nasdaq. Let's take a look at the S&P. Then we'll take a look at the DAX. We'll look at the Japanese market. Then we'll look at some other markets as well. So S&P again. And I think it's important. I think it can be. Here's a great example actually of it breaking below a trend line here, the S&P, just like oil did yesterday in March, early March, and then bang, the market moved out to fresh all-time highs. So again, I think this does illustrate not that we don't necessarily need to panic just because a market breaks its trend line. Anyway, S&P 500. So it is only a couple of days ago the S&P hit fresh all-time highs, okay, and it's been clobbered, obviously, over the last 24 hours or so. But for me, so because we've hit all-time highs, I need to readjust the trend line to look something like that. So for me, short-term volatility, great, but I think it's only if we start to slip below the late January lows on the S&P, down around 36.60, that sort of area, do we have to worry that this recovery is over? And I think we have been almost spoilt, with a lot of these markets in recent months where we haven't really experienced normal sell-offs. We've had periods like here, you can see it on the S&P, from November through to end of January, so 3 months, where we didn't have very much in the way of sell-off. So I think we're seeing more normal volatility, I think, in markets at the moment. So again, pretty dramatic, but nothing out of the ordinary. So for me, for the S&P this afternoon, I mean, the market's been open an hour because the US is opening at 1:30 UK time at the moment, clearly because their clocks have gone forwards or backwards. I can never remember the way forwards, but we haven't gone yet in the UK. But for me, I think that's a really interesting market to watch today to see if we see some sort of recovery. But broadly speaking, I don't think these trends are really changed in S&P or the what's the other one? The Nasdaq, DAX. Again, volatility in the DAX. Of course, all stock markets tend to move as one. But again, let's. I think it's important to have a sense of perspective. It was only yesterday the DAX hit fresh all-time highs, so traded up to 14,800 on the DAX yesterday. Bit of volatility. Let's take a look at the short-term chart. Pretty dramatic to watch it. There's the all-time high, I think yesterday. Then slips back about 230 points, and we're bouncing back at the moment. So for me, same old thing. Buyer of dips in stock markets for now. And finally, the Nikkei. Then we'll take a look at some other markets. Take a look at the Japanese index, Nikkei 225. So again, looking like it has, it did again. It slipped below that trend line in March, early March of this year. Big down day yesterday, but for me, lots of support chugging in from late Jan, 27,500 through to 28,300 in the first week of March. So I don't think stock markets have turned just yet. So I would be expecting, and I'm positioned in my own trading for further gains in stock markets or a recovery from here. Clearly, nobody knows. No one's got a crystal ball, which is why things like stop losses are really important. But for me, I'll be waiting to see if these markets can bounce back. Okay, let's take a look at gold and silver. So we've done oil, we've done stock market indices. Take a look at gold and silver, then we'll take a look at currencies, including Bitcoin. Gold and silver, and the US dollar. Perhaps let's start this off by looking at the dollar index first of all, because I think clearly what's been happening with the US dollar is really important. I've mentioned this so many times that do we see, is this year 2021 going to see the great US dollar comeback? This is the dollar index. This is the dollar against a basket of other currencies. The index peaked at 104 in March last year. Then everyone embraced risk again, and the dollar index slid to 89. So lost about 15% since March last year into January. But I've often wondered on these live events that we do, are we seeing a turnaround in the US dollar index? And I still wonder that. We've seen a bit of volatility this week on that Fed decision. No interest rate changes, but a bounce back the last couple of days. So dollar strength, and this is clearly a real threat to markets such as gold and silver. But let's take a look at them. Let's take a look at gold. Let's bring it up. So let's start as usual. I think we did do a video on gold this week. There's the long-term trend for gold, going back to August 2018. The trend is up. That longer-term trend is up. Hit all-time highs, 2,075 last August. But since then, it's been correcting. And for me, for my money, we are pretty much still in that correction. So are we going to see 2,000 plus gold anytime soon? I don't think so. I think it is interesting down at these levels. I think we talked about this probably last week, whenever we did the live stream last week. We have these lows from April last year. So we're almost 12 months ago. you can see how important $1,660 was on the way up. So if gold is going to turn around anywhere, perhaps we're here. So for me, the trade on gold would be if we saw it under a bit of pressure next week and bounces again ahead of the old low. That old low is that day there, 8th of March, 1676. There's maybe a trading buy there, but I do think there are much more interesting markets than gold at the moment. But it would be interesting to see if 1660 continues to hold. Okay, so I think it's dull, as I say. Perhaps next week, we've seen rallies along the way. Perhaps this is another rally that runs out of steam, goes back. But where it gets interesting is if it holds above that old low. If I flip this over to an hourly chart, there we go. Maybe it's a bit clearer. So that sort of level there, 1680, 1675. Let's see what happens. But I just don't think it's the most interesting market at the moment. Silver, I do have a trade on silver. But again, I think this is pretty boring. I think I say it every week at the moment. And nothing much has changed. And look where we are on silver. These are daily candles. So March the 12th was the last time we did this here. So silver is where it was a week ago. Okay, so you can see how tight the range has been. Pretty dull market. For my money, that recovery is still just about intact on silver. So the recovery off the March lows last year, that's still going. So it's almost a year ago. It is a year ago, pretty much a year ago that silver bottomed. So for me, that recovery is still going, but it's just pretty dull, pretty dull. So I'd still be a buyer on dips. Good support from $24 on silver, middle of January. I think if silver lost the old lows, late November lows, around 21.80, then we could see a much bigger sell-off for silver. But now, mildly positive, just fairly boring week to week at the moment. But if I had to do a trade on silver, I'd be a buyer. Let's take a look at FX. Take a look at the currencies. So let's start with Bitcoin. Let's have a look at that. I've got it saved in my charts, haven't I? Hold on a sec. I've got it saved in here somewhere. I mean, if you've watched any of our videos, my whole thing is about trend following. You can't deny the trend on trending Bitcoin. So March the 13th, last Saturday, pushes out to fresh all-time highs. 61,700 is where it traded up to. I've picked up on the trend here from October last year. That trend's clearly still up. Even if Bitcoin drops to 32,000, that trend is still up. So for me, on Bitcoin, even though I've often said I think it's a crazy market, I'd still be a buyer on dips on Bitcoin. If I was a buyer now, where would my stop go? Probably, based on the daily chart, the closest I'd want my stop is those late February lows at 43,000. I think that's the closest I want to stop on Bitcoin. But for now at least, I'd expect it to move higher. I suppose a more aggressive stop, you could go for the lows before it moved out to those all-time highs. So if you're a buyer now, stop under maybe 53,000. It's quite interesting that it paused there on the way up. It was the old high from back here, a high from back here, I should say. Pushes out to all-time highs, sells off, and holds at 53,000. So I think a more aggressive stop on Bitcoin would be the other side of that. Still $5,000+ away from where the market is now, but it's a volatile market, so we need to give it room. Let's take a look at some of the other currencies. Pound against the dollar. You can see we've seen a lot of volatility in these markets the last couple of days, although they are trading pretty much where they were a week or so ago, or a couple of weeks ago. So a lot of short-term volatility. So if you take a look at, there's the trend. There's the trend I often look at. Pound against the dollar. That trend is up. It was in February, so it's less than a month ago. We saw the pound hit its best levels against the US dollar since April 2018. So for me, I still be a buyer on dips. So for now, I want to be a buyer. I don't want to be a buyer today, but I want to see a bit of stability and a bit of strength come in. The closest I want my stop at the moment, really obvious place for a stop for me, the other side of that 5th of March low at 137.78. Let's flip it over to an hourly chart. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch the pound first of all next week. You can see it's got slammed today as well. But look at these lows from early March. Look how much time it's spent. It has spent around 137.80. Back to here, middle of Feb, early March, almost March 16th. So for my money, I'd be looking to see if the pound can stage a recovery next week. We've got those UK unemployment numbers on Tuesday, UK inflation on whenever it is, Wednesday. So there's a lot of UK data coming out next week. It'll be interesting to see what the pound can do. But for me, I would still be looking for the market to turn around and try and push its way back up through 140 and beyond. Let's take a look at the euro. So the euro again. So the euro, big picture for the euro. For my money, we still have that trend from March last year. So we're 12 months into that trend for euro against the US dollar. It's still giving up ground at the moment. I thought it would have got more of a move on the euro. It hasn't yet. But again, like the pound, I think it's really interesting. Going into next week, we had this old low left, March the 9th, 118.35. Let's flip it over to an hourly chart. Here we go. Where is it? March the 9th, those lows there. So I think it's another interesting one. That was the move on the Fed decision, the US interest rate decision earlier this week. So for me, an aggressive trade would be to be a buyer now, 118.85, with a stop the other side of the March the 9th lows, the other side of 118, let's say. But I think it's interesting, all of these, because we have seen plenty of volatility the last couple of days, hasn't really changed much from a bigger picture point of view. But it's interesting if we get a retest of these old lows on some of these markets. So let's see what happens. The only other market I'm going to mention, then I'll get into some of the questions. Palladium. We've touched on this in the past. I've got a Facebook page. I'll put a link up to it afterwards. But I thought it was interesting this week. Palladium really got a move on it. It's a really interesting market because it was some fantastic runs in 2018 through to 2020. The price of palladium went from 880 to 2,800. So we saw palladium increase more than threefold. Then got absolutely clobbered last year. And it has been sort of trying to trend higher, but it's been really boring for ages. I do have a trade on palladium that's been running for months now. And it finally, what's interesting, I thought, for palladium is the move we saw this week. We've seen it trade up to levels not seen, almost back up to I don't know if it's the all-time high, but a multi-year high up here. So maybe that's an interesting market to watch next week as well. If we get a pullback and pull back into the range and back to that trend line, perhaps that's an interesting market to watch. But let's see what happens. So plenty going on. Markets are still quite nervous, obviously, about the threat of inflation further down the line. Does it mean a US dollar comeback? So the dollar is an interesting market to watch. Stock markets have been hit. I'd be expecting these stock markets to bounce back next week. Let's have a quick look at what the Nasdaq's doing. It's still just sort of flipping around, it seems, at the moment. Be interesting to see if these markets can bounce back next week. Oil is maybe the more dramatic one. There's oil, so that's up 60 cents since we bought it, isn't it? I think I bought it at 60.18. So oil is the more dramatic market here because of the size of the falls. I think I started this off by saying I thought that fall in oil was an opportunity. Let's see how that performs over the next few days. But for me, that trend in oil is still up. We've got higher highs, higher lows. Let's see what next week brings for the oil price. So lots to watch. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to just list up. I'm going to jump into the comments now, the questions. Just a quick one though. To find out more about the company, obviously I do this with Capital.com. Go to Capital.com, surprisingly enough. I've started a Facebook page with markets and just short updates during the week. You can find that by going to davidjonestrading.com. Any questions, you can message me via that or drop me an email, david.jones@capital.com. Follow me on Twitter, @JonesTheMarkets, and follow Capital on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. We passed 100,000 subscribers this week on YouTube, so thanks very much for those of you who subscribe. If you don't subscribe, if you could, that'd be great. you're watching it on YouTube now, if you hit subscribe, that'd be very good for us. Okay, let's get into the questions. Let's see what's happening. Could we review copper? Yeah, let's have a look at copper. It's gone a bit boring, copper, hasn't it? But the last few weeks anyway. But I was looking at it just this morning, actually, thinking, I think I did have some trades on. I got stopped out on the way down for a profit. The trend is undoubtedly up since last March on copper, when it was down at 2, and it's doubled since last year. And it's just, it went crazy in mid-Feb, and it's just gone a bit boring. So for me, I want to be a buyer. The only question is, I think, do I buy now, or do I wait to see if we sell off back towards 3.8 or something on copper, so a 5% fall. But for me, that trend is up, but it just hasn't done an awful lot this month, has it, the price of copper? So I think so if I was a buyer now, the absolute closest I'd have my stop, the other side of the March the 4th lows. In reality, I'd have it much further away, probably down here, the other side of the trend line. So it's a bit sort of stuck in the middle at the moment, copper. So let's see what happens. China A50. Let's have a look at the China A50. What's that market? Done. So the FTSE China A50 is an interesting one. It's a FTSE index based on Chinese listed A stocks. So it's one way of getting exposure to the Chinese market. For me, I think when we looked at this a week ago, not much has changed. For me, that trend is still up. Okay, it's broken the trend line, but we've still got higher lows, higher major lows. All right, it's broken this low, and higher major highs. So again, for me, I think maybe it's a trading opportunity. Perhaps if you look at the RSI down here, perhaps we have a bit of bullish divergence coming up on the RSI. Big support, or relatively good support, at 16.4 on the China A50. It's an interesting market. I think it's an interesting level down here. So for me, I'd be a buyer with a stop loss the other side of those late November lows on the China A50. So let's see what happens. AMD. What's AMD? Is that the chip company? AMD. Let's have a quick look. Advanced Micro Devices. There we go. So global provider of semiconductors. I think we've looked at these before, haven't they? I would say, I mean, it's another one where I think you'd have to say, if we went back and look at what we have here, the major trend is up, isn't it? I'd be tempted to be a buyer, honestly, for a couple of reasons here, actually. First of all, the major trend is up, if we go back to that bigger picture trend. $72 has been big support, and I'd argue we've had the retest of the big support. I suppose some people might see a head and shoulders or a double top or something in there, but for me, we've had that retest of the big support. It's pushed down again at the moment. It's trading at 78.60. I'd be a buyer with a stop the other side of these lows that go back to September last year. So I think it's an interesting one. It's maybe that trend does feel like it's lost quite a bit of momentum since the summer. But for me, 72, I think in AMD is an interesting level, isn't it? So that's it. Let's see. Let me flip through some of the other questions. Uranium, I think that comes up every week, but we don't list it. We don't list uranium. There's uranium participation that we've looked at, which I think is an investment holding company that invests in uranium. I remember looking at that a week ago. That's clearly done well again, but come off heavily the last couple of days. Again, I suppose I don't know anything about it. I'd still be looking to be a buyer on weakness. Maybe not a buyer today, given the volatility we're seeing today, but an interesting one to watch next week. We had lots of support at 480 for uranium participation, so watching to see if there's a bounce next week. Let's see what happens. But we don't list uranium as the absolute thing itself. But on that one, which I'm guessing is a reasonable proxy for what's going on with the price of uranium, for me, it is all about the trend. And the trend is still up. It's just how far does the sell-off go? What's happening with silver? We looked at silver. Could we have a look at Pfizer and Moderna? Yeah, let's have a look at Pfizer. I thought it was interesting today. This whole I retweeted somebody, and it was the spat or the disagreement we've heard from the European Union about the AstraZeneca drugs and the reluctance to get vaccination. I think because even if they order now, because they're behind where they should be in their vaccination, it's going to be difficult to avoid a third wave for continental Europe. So clearly it has all been quite politicized. It's not good news for them at all. This is Pfizer. What do we think on Pfizer? I mean, we've got here the last year or so. It's pretty boring, isn't it? Over the last year, I think this is when the November was when the coronavirus vaccine news started breaking. I don't know. It's just dull. To me, it's I don't know. What would you do? I suppose you could take the view it overshot on weakness down here in Feb, so be a buyer at $35.50 with a stop the other side of the late Feb lows at 33. But I think any vaccine news, anything else is all factored into the price now. I don't think, unless they suddenly come out with something that cures, the common cold as well as coronavirus. But I don't think there's any more coronavirus vaccine upside for this one. Famous last words. Let's see what happens. I think it was all here, So we're sort of well off already. The December highs. We are 20% below. Not quite those December highs. And what was the other one? Moderna, wasn't it? Moderna, the other thingy. Where is this listed? Okay. I mean, clearly that's had a much bigger impact. I don't follow the fundamentals of these vaccine stocks, so I don't really know that much about them. But from a fundamental point of view, but clearly, again, going back to November when the news about the vaccine breaks, big move in Moderna. The price early November was 70, and we're now trading at double that at 140. So I don't know. I think again, it's how much more do you think there is left to come? It's by no means a specialist subject of mine. If I was a buyer now, I'd put my stop under 120 and see what happened. That's how I trade it. That trend is up in Moderna. We've only got data. I don't know when they floated. We've only got data going back to March of last year. The trend is clearly up. It's whether you think it's going to sell off more from here. The closest I bought my stop is under 120 on Moderna. So let's see. What else have we got? Canadian dollar, New Zealand dollar. Let's have a look at that one. I must admit, I've never looked at that one. Let's have a look at that. I do have a trade on the New Zealand dollar against the US dollar that's been hit quite a bit today. I don't think we list it. I don't think we list that one. Maybe New Zealand dollar Canadian. Sorry, I was looking the wrong way around. Here we go. So for me, let's have a look on the dailies. So when we're seeing the chart going up here, we're seeing New Zealand dollar strength against the Canadian dollar. So for me, what would I do? I would probably be tempted to be a buyer. So again, it's from a market psychology and a sentiment point of view, it's a little bit like oil in terms of we've had a trend and the trend has broken, but is the trend really over? So I suppose for me, an aggressive trade here, be a buyer at 89.50 with a stop the other side of 89 maybe. It's a pretty tight stop because I think if it does dump again and make new lows for this down move, I think the risk is for a much bigger sell-off. So for me, it's an interesting one actually to watch going into next week. I'd give it one last chance of recovery. I think that's what I'd be tempted to do on Canadian dollar, New Zealand dollar. Let's see what happens. Cotton, yes, I did do. I think I came out with cotton. No, I was looking at it earlier today. So cotton, someone's asking about cotton. Would you go short? I would not. Personally, I would not go short. Clearly, I haven't got a crystal ball. You've got to do what you think is right. But for me, the price of cotton has dropped about 10% since the February highs. But the trend is still up in cotton. So personally, I am watching cotton going into next week to see if we get some strength coming back in on the price of cotton. Trendline support coming in around 78, let's call it. Lows from early Feb at about 79. The market's trading 85. So for me, if we pull back to here and get a bit of strength, I think it looks interesting again for me for a buy. Clearly, your view might be different. That's what makes a market. Let's see what happens next week on cotton. But I'd be tempted to be a buyer. I suppose you could argue to buy it now because we've pushed down. Let's flip it over to an intraday chart. We've pushed down to that low, 10th of March low at 82.5. Pushed down and bounced off it quite sharply. So it's quite an interesting one, but for me, the trend is still up in cotton. I might have a look at that afterwards, actually. Cotton, we looked at pound against the dollar. Do you see oil going below $55? I don't know with oil. I think for me, I mean, it is. I think I've said it quite often. I find it quite surprising that oil has got as high as it has, obviously. But we are where we are. Is it going to go below 55? I think it's possible. I think next week, if it broke below 58, we could see 55 quite quickly. But for me, I think it's going to go up. Let's see. Let's see what happens. Platinum. Let's have a look at platinum. Platinum was a great performer earlier in the year and into February. Here we go. There was the move in Feb for platinum. Moved about, what did it move? Probably about 20% in February. But for me, that again, a bit like cotton, the trend is still up. So for me, I'd still be a buyer of dips in platinum, really, from here. So that's what I think. So I think I still have an open trade on platinum. So I'll still be in there. We looked at gold, we looked at the China A50, we looked at the euro. Yeah, the euro weakness due to slow vaccine rollouts. That could be an issue. Let's see what happens. New Zealand dollar against the ruble. I don't think we've. There we go. New Zealand dollar against the ruble. Another one where we've got a great trend. New Zealand dollar against the ruble. So the Russian ruble. So for me, again, I'd be a buyer of the New Zealand dollar. The closest I'd want my stop, the other side of these December lows, below 51.5. But the trend is up, isn't it? It keeps pushing out. It only sort of scrapes its way out to a new high, scrapes its way out again as recently as late February. But the trend is up in the New Zealand dollar against the ruble. So for me, I'd still be a buyer on that one. Tesla. Come have a look at Tesla. Yes, let's have a look at Tesla. I think it's interesting, Tesla. I think for me, I'd be thinking about being a buyer, but wouldn't be a buyer yet. I think it's going to be, we've seen this route for tech stocks in recent days. Trend for Tesla off the March lows. We're a year into this trend for Tesla. March lows for Tesla last year. Trend lines coming in about $500. I think it will be interesting again going into next week. If we saw a bit of strength, the closest I would put my stop would be the other side of that low, March the 5th low, $539 a share. So I think Tesla is interesting, definitely, next week. Maybe when we do this thing next week, I'll have bought 2 more Tesla shares after selling my old ones at 750. We'll see what happens. But I think if we get a bit of strength for Tesla, it's definitely an opportunity with an obvious place for a stop, and that trend line is still up. Let's see what happens. Dollar, South African rand. Let's have a look at that. Dollar against the rand. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember looking at this a week ago, I think, or in recent weeks, and it looks like almost a mini US dollar index where it's made a low and it's trying to stage a recovery. So I suppose, I think it's a tricky one, this. The risk-reward trade, the good risk-reward trade, would be to be a buyer at 14.73, where it is now, with a stop loss the other side of 14.30, those lows from February. But you could argue that the trend from March is still down. So I think it sort of feels like it wants to swap the trend and start recovering, but it's not very convincing yet. But I bet if I was buying it, I'd put my stop the other side of these lows. It's an interesting one. I think it's a bit unresolved at the moment, but it's an interesting one down at these levels. Facebook. Let's look at Facebook stock. Facebook. Oh, we've still got a trade running on Facebook. It must be from ages ago. That looks pretty bullish, doesn't it? Pretty bullish, the old Facebook. I think we did that on a live stream. Where's that Facebook trade? Hang on a second. Just humour me a second. 15th of Jan. Bought them at 252 with a stop at 230. I should move the stop there, otherwise I'll forget. Let me just put the stop to 270. Okay. There we go. 15th. We bought them here off the old support. I think it's interesting, isn't it? They've been clearly quite sideways since August last year. Yeah, we're running up to the top of the range, aren't we? So I suppose if you really wanted to go short Facebook, you know, we've got obvious levels now for more than 6 months, where whenever Facebook gets near or above $300 a share, it doesn't stay there very long. So if it's going to run out of steam anywhere, we're getting pretty close. Let's see what happens. Or if it breaks out through 310, it looks like a buy. But I think it's interesting. Let's come back to it in a week's time. But at the moment, I'm quite happy to run the trade. German DAX overbought. I think it bounced back. Yeah, I do think it will bounce back, the DAX, because that, you know, we need to, you know, have a sense of proportion here. We've seen big falls, bounce back to 14,000. You think fall to 14,000. It is very overbought, but it was only yesterday. It made fresh all-time highs. So I don't know. I mean, 14,000 is only, you know, where it was 10 days ago. It's possible. It's possible we get a pullback, and I'd still be a buyer on a pullback. The risk is, of course, if you wait for a pullback and the pullback never happens. That's always the downside. What do you think about natural gas? I don't have any trades on natural gas, but I think, for me, there's a buying opportunity coming in natural gas. And it may be next week. I think it's interesting. It's always a strange one, natural gas. But, you know, I think the moves we had last year broke the downtrend that had been in place since 2018. The market pushed up to 340, sold off again to 220. Big support from last summer at 218. I was surprised it's given up so much in the last month. For me, I'm waiting for a bit of strength to come in, and I'll be a buyer. And the closest I want my stop will be the other side of 226. I think. So I think, let's see, I think again, you know, you can be patient with it, but I think maybe next week we'll see a bit of strength come back into the natural gas price. It's a funny old market, but I do wonder if it's trying to make a base down here. Let's see what happens. Any tips for staying emotionless? I think it's a good question. I think the reasons people get emotional when they're trading, it's because they risk too much money. You know, if every little move, if every 1 cent move in the price of oil is a lot of money for you, then you should trade smaller. So I think, you know, trade small is an obvious one. You know, and be patient, which is really hard. It is hard to be patient, but you've got to be patient. You know, and don't take on too big a level of risk. That's how you stay emotionless. You trade at a level where, you know, a little bit of money either way doesn't make that much difference. The problem is, I think, when it comes to markets, people get greedy and they want to double their money every month, which means they have to take on big levels of risk, which means they get emotional. So I think trading size is a big, important one for trading, controlling your emotions when trading. Can you show, we don't do options. Which stock sector would you prefer next week? I've got absolutely no idea. I don't look at sectors. But I think the NASDAQ is interesting. So the tech sector for a bounce back maybe next week. You know, I think that's an interesting one. It's not doing much today. These are hourly candles. It's all a bit choppy and boring, isn't it? Silver. Can we have a look at BHP? So BHP, the big miner. It's a big mining stock. Oh, that's had a bit of a tough week by the looks of it. Let's take a look at it. It's interesting, that, isn't it? It's quite... Have I brought up the right one here? It looks a bit scrappy, that. Hold on a second. This is BH... Do you mean BHP, or is it BHP Group? That one. Yeah, BHP Billiton. The trading looks a bit weird on here. But anyway, for me, that trend in BHP is up. since March of last year. It's only a few weeks ago, up here at 80. Beginning of March, hit its best levels for a long time by the looks of it. So for me, I'd be waiting to be a buyer in BHP. So I think it's an interesting week next week. We had those lows around 66, 65, whatever it was. So I think that's a really interesting one to watch for the bounce for me, BHP. We looked at gold. If you missed the gold one, when we stop doing the live, there'll be the video, a recording will be available. Tilray, do you think Tilray will go silly again? Is that the drug stock, isn't it? No, I don't. I think it just looks. I mean, I think the before all of this craziness, which I'm guessing was it like a Reddit Wall Street Bets thing again? I don't think so, but I think the trend, the trend. The trend is all messed up, isn't it? Because of what's gone on. I would see something like that, and I would go and trade something else. But I think if you want to be a buyer, an obvious level for a stop is underneath the March the 5th low at 18, which is 30% away from where the price is now. We did a GameStop video yesterday. I don't think the sound was very good, so apologies for that. But GameStop, if people make money off them, great, but I would not go near them with a barge pole because they're just stupid. It's just stupid volatility. So for me, Tilray, I don't know. I think we need a bit more calmer trading, but I don't think we'll see these sort of crazy moves again in the short term, personally. Dollar South African Rand. We looked at dollar South African Rand. Took a look at that. Sugar. Sugar's an interesting one as well. Sugar is another interesting one. I think sugar again has been quite weak. Sugar US or sugar UK? Sugar US. Been quite weak. It's given up a lot, about 15% in the last month. But again, going into next week, there's lots of things for me at the moment that look like this, that look like they're still weak at the moment. But going into next week, do we see the strength come back? So I think sugar is another interesting one where I'll be looking for a buy. But it's got to stop going down for us. At the moment, it's still going down. It's still weak. But I'll be watching it next week. We've got lots of support mid-Jan, around 15.2. Got trend line support, 15.30. So it's a really interesting one to watch going into next week. That one. What about sugar? David Roberts' strategy is lucrative. What's he talking about? I've got no idea what that guy's talking about. Let's get out of that. Cocoa. Let's have a look at cocoa. Cocoa US. I think this is another one that it's just gone a bit boring, hasn't it? There's a great longer term trend in cocoa from 2017, and I did look at it today, and I thought, well, maybe if it comes under some pressure the next couple of weeks, the trend is up. I think it's just difficult to try and find a sort of sensible entry point. Someone's just typed in capitals, why are you so bullish on crude oil? I personally think the bullish trend is over, just an opinion. Well, you see, it's opinions that make a market, isn't it? So if everybody thought the same way, there'd be no market, would there? So for me, I'm bullish because it's only been knocked back to where it was at the beginning of the month. So let's see what happens. Let's see what happens after. Volkswagen. I did see that Volkswagen jumped 20% this week, didn't they? I don't know why they jumped 20%, but then they were down a lot. Were they down a lot the next day? Yeah. The trend is up though on Volkswagen. Again, if we went back to wherever it was, March last year, the trend is up in Volkswagen. I mean, I've got no idea what that crazy move was over the last couple of days. But I'd be a buyer somewhere. I'd rather be a buyer, wouldn't we all, if it got knocked back to where it was end of February at 160. But it's maybe for me, it's perhaps a bit too overextended up here. But let's see. Euro sterling, euro against the pound. I was expecting a bounce on that last week. It is a pretty boring market. It's sort of having a go again today, isn't it? It's this level, isn't it? Euro sterling, this low from here, wherever that is, February. 85, and it's sort of trying, but not. I think we did a trade on that last week, didn't we? Euro sterling. Where is it? There we go. That's the trade from last week's live stream. Currently losing £7. Bought at 85.90. The market's 85.85, so it hasn't really done much over the week. But again, a big level. If it's going to bounce from anywhere, the euro against the pound, I think this is it. This is it. So let's see, what else have we got? We looked at oil, we looked at DXY, the dollar index. I still think perhaps the dollar index is going to, it's an interesting market to watch to see if it stages a recovery, the dollar index. BlackBerry, let's take a look at BlackBerry. I think, was that another Reddit stock from earlier in the year? I think it was, wasn't it? Look at it. So it did go from $7 to $28 and back to $11. I don't know. It's a bit. I think when you have that burst of volatility, it just knocks everything out, doesn't it? So, what would you do if you were to trade it now? What would you do? I wouldn't do anything with it. But if you wanted to be a buyer at $10.94, the closest I'd have my stop would be under the March the 9th lows at $10. But yeah, it's just a bit too crazy for me, that one. Any thoughts on NVIDIA and Intel? NVIDIA, this looks a bit boring, doesn't it? It's a little bit boring, NVIDIA. Just been going sideways since August last year. I mean, again, an aggressive trade. You could definitely be a buyer. You know, as a sort of a range trade. The bottom of the range in September was whatever it was, $460. It's tested the bottom of the range. You know, maybe do that. Intel. Oh, Intel looks good, doesn't it? Intel's got a trend. There you go. That's all right. It's quite interesting, though, actually, because it's getting back up to where it was January last year and June last year. Sort of 66 to 70 is where it really ran into trouble last time around. But I'd still be a buyer for now. See if it can squeeze a little bit higher from here, Intel. So let's see. Right, we looked at natural gas. Wheat, I've got a trade on wheat. Wheat hasn't done much, I don't think. It was looking quite strong the other month. There it is, there's wheat. But it's not, I think, you know, again, I think it needs to get a move on. You know, it's broken out this trend line. Is that trend reversing? I think if it slipped below those December lows, it definitely looks like the trend has reversed. But funny old market at the moment, wheat, not really doing what I thought it would do. Right, I think we're going to, why can you manage your mind to not, how can you manage your mind to not sell at the highest and take the price down to where the stop was placed? It's a very good question, and it is difficult, but I think you need to decide what sort of trader you're going to be, right? Do you want to make money or do you not want to make money? I think you know, most people lose. Let's not forget, 70% plus of people lose money trading. This is a fact. But here's a great example. This has been my best trade over the last 2 months probably, and it came up because someone mentioned it in a live stream. I think it was February the 11th or something like that. I bought in sterling yen. Okay, so sterling yen. I've trailed the stop all the way up from somewhere. But I've given back profit. I've seen over the last couple of days the market's gone from 152.53 to 150.55. So I've given up 200 points profit, but I have to be willing to give up profit, like here, to try and make the bigger profit. And I don't know. I think you just it's difficult if you're a trend follower, but you just need to grit your teeth and do it. You know, it's the same with oil. You know, there were plenty. I remember when we were doing all the oil videos earlier this year, we were really, you know, I would keep buying in on the videos, and you see comments say, well, how can you buy when it's this high? And look where it went. You know, it went to $68, the price of oil. I think you know, trading. If it was easy, we'd all be making money, wouldn't we? But I think it is, you know, it is difficult seeing a market move against you. But if you're following big trends, I think it's just something you've got to do. But I would never say it's easy. Right, what we're going to do is wrap things up there because I've done an hour, and I think that's long enough for anybody. So there is a recording available of this. Now, when we finish now, the recording will be available. Don't forget to find out more. Go to Capital.com. DavidJonesTrading.com is my Facebook page. I put a few different things on there during the week, so like it or whatever you do with Facebook. Any questions? I can answer general trading questions. David.Jones@Capital.com. You can follow me on Twitter @JonesTheMarkets. Follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Please subscribe because it all helps, everything that we do. And we'll do it all again this time next week. End of the month, isn't it? Is it? It's not April. No, it's not Easter, is it? No. So we'll do it again next Friday. See where we are. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for all your support. Really enjoyed doing these, looking at all these different markets. But we'll leave things there. Good luck with your trading.